Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name's Danielle and I'm the owner of Damn Fancy Creations and the Drunk Flamingo Glitter. If you guys are new to my channel, I do want to let you know that all of my groups and links are posted in the description below in case you guys want to check them out. Today's tutorial is day 7 of our 12 days of Christmas, and I am so excited to share this one with y'all. I always wanted to do a Christmas tree tumbler, but never got around to it, so I figured that now was the perfect time. I didn't want to do the traditional green Christmas tree. If you guys have been following my tutorials this season, y'all will know that I am loving the vintage pastel style this season. So I wanted to do a pink version with chunky snow. So it looks like it could have come right out of Whoville, and I just love this style. And of course, all of my toppers are made to be removable. I was actually the first one that wanted my toppers to be removable because it just made sense to me that you would make them removable so that you could properly clean them and disinfect them if needed. So all of my removable toppers are attached with strong magnets, and I will walk you through that step by step on how we're going to do that today. Everything else you see listed here will also be covered in today's tutorial, but if you guys have questions about materials or steps that I went over, please just ask in the comments or in one of my tutorial groups, and I will be happy to answer them for you. Don't forget that all of my 12 Days of Christmas videos have a giveaway associated with it. You can find the details in my tutorial group on Facebook, which is linked in the description. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get started on this tutorial, and I hope you guys enjoy. If you guys didn't know, I will be teaching a 2-day class at next year's TUMBLERCON. If you guys are interested in going, I do have a link to tickets in the description, as well as a discount code. I hope to see you guys there. Alright guys, so before we get started on the actual tumbler, we're going to pop off the bottom. I just use my metal putty knife and hammer it down in between the metal cap and the tumbler, and it pops right off. Removing the cap does not affect the integrity of the tumbler. It's just a stainless cap that covers the bottom. There's nothing in there that's going to hurt the tumbler. All of the bottom of the Steel Magnolia's tumblers do pop off except for their curved mug and the tapered skinnies. I love removing the bottom because you can do glitter butts, shaker butts, water globes, bling them, so many different possibilities. So once we get the bottom popped off, we are ready to start on our tumbler. I am going to be using Culture Sculpt, which is a sculpting epoxy. You do want to wear gloves. And I chose to use Culture Sculpt or a sculpting epoxy because it is much lighter weight than polymer clay. Polymer clay is a little easier to work with because you can kind of smooth it out with your fingers. You don't have to mix parts together, but it is heavier. So since I was covering the entire tumbler with the 3D material, I opted to use Culture Sculpt just so it wouldn't be too heavy to carry around. Now, Culture Sculpt is similar to regular epoxy. You're going to have a part A and part B. You're going to dig out equal parts or about equal parts, and then we're going to mix it together. One part is a little bit more flaky, as you can see. Little chunks are kind of flaking off of it because it's really lightweight, almost like a Model Magic clay. But I like to just fold it into itself. And I know I say this every time I use Culture Sculpt, but it always reminds me of that episode on Schitt's Creek where they're talking about folding in the cheese. That's just what I think of. We're folding in the Culture Sculpt. That's what we're doing. And you can see in the containers how one is more of a bright white color, the other is more of a kind kind of like vanilla ice cream color. And we're just going to combine each part until the color is pretty even across the board. And you do have to be careful with how much you actually mix together, because it can start to cure on you if you mix too much and let it sit for a while. You will feel it start to get warm in the center, and then it will cure and you will not be able to use it. So I just mix up a little bit at a time. If you're not familiar with Culture Sculpt, then you may want to mix a smaller amount than I did, but I have used this for years, so I'm very familiar with it. So what I'm going to do for my little chunky tree branches is just roll out a line and divide it in sections and kind of form triangles. They're not pointy triangles, they're like blunt tip triangles. And then I'm going to wrap that around the tumbler. I am starting at the base where the cup starts to get wider. So the bottom half is going to be like the tree trunk, and then the rest is basically going to be the tree part, branches and leaves and snow and all that good stuff. And I did practice a few different ways. You can see that I have Culture Sculpt all over my tumbler from where I applied it and then removed it because I did not like how it looked. But this was the technique that I landed on. So when I add the second layer, I am applying or arranging the triangles so they're kind of in between each other. And then I start to slightly angle them down a little bit. And I do have a small little medicine cup with water in it just to smooth out some of the harsh lines and cracks and all that kind of stuff. And you do want to be careful with how much water you add, because if you add too much, it can make it pretty liquidy and not hold its shape as well. But if you're adding just a small amount with your finger, then you should be okay. So we are just doing the same thing. We are applying the little row of blunt triangles, and I am just smoothing out any cracks that I see, kind of blending the branches together, and also trying to fill any spaces that I see. So I am just kind of forming the little branches with my gloved finger. I also always have my little silicone tools on hand in case I need to like really kind of reshape things that are more detailed. And we're just going to do this all the way up our tumbler. So I am going to mix some more Culture Sculpt now, the same way that we did before. Equal parts of A and B, fold it all together. And once we get that folded all together and mixed well, we are just going to roll out a few more lines. And I will also point out that you can go back and add more of the little triangles if you want to, which I did end up doing. I don't think that I filmed that part, or I did film it and the video just didn't take. I can't remember. But all I did was kind of shape some triangle or teardrop pieces and just kind of place them where I wanted to on the Christmas tree to fill in some blank spots, or wherever I felt like there needed to be a little bit more branches. And y'all can kind of see here how I'm just kind of taking those little triangles and kind of pulling them down as I'm shaping them, so that they're not just sticking straight out. So we're pulling them down a little bit so it has more of that kind of cartoony Christmas tree shape that you would see in Whoville or Charlie Brown. And obviously, if you want your branches or your tree shape to look a little bit different than mine, this is kind of where you guys can personalize it a little bit and make it more to your style. If you want your branches thinner, then you can definitely do that. If you want them smaller, thicker, however you want to do it. This is just the style that I landed on. It just kind of matched the style of some of my cups that I had done this year, like the gingerbread house, the holly cup that I did, just kind of that cartoony style. And we're just going to apply these little lines all the way up the tumbler. You guys can kind of see how the very first line that I applied was kind of thick and chunky, and then they got a little bit thinner as I went up the cup, just to thin it out a little bit, so it kind of gave the appearance of tapering down a little bit. And I also will say that if you use cornstarch on your gloves, then it does prevent the Culture Sculpt from sticking to it as much. I was really just trying to hurry and get this done, so I was not too worried about the Culture Sculpt sticking to my glove. It does help a little bit, but I just didn't really feel like breaking it out this time. But y'all can see how it's like sticking all to my glove. Also, when you're doing tumblers like this with Culture Sculpt, I would say to be very careful about not touching the inside of the tumbler, because it is hard to get out. Once this dries, it is just like epoxy. It's going to be stuck on there. So if you get it on the inside of the tumbler, it will be hard to remove. Anything on the outside can be sanded off, but the inside is a little bit more difficult to clean up. I have gotten it on the inside when I have done my scoop cups in the past, and I learned very quickly to be extra careful when I am doing stuff around the rim or touching the cup, because I don't want to get this on the inside. And when I get to the rim of my cup, I am leaving just a very small space so that the Culture Sculpt does not go all the way up to the edge. All of this is going to be spray painted pink after this is cured. So everything is going to be blended together. So once my bulk of my tumbler is complete, I am going to work on my topper. I am using a car coaster as the base because I know that this size will fit inside the lid that I am using. I don't know what size this is off the top of my head. I will try to measure it and put it in the description, but my best advice is just to measure the lid that you're going to be using and order a car coaster that is close to that size, or a car coaster mold that is close to that size. If you need it a little bit smaller, you can always sand it down with your hand sander or Dremel or something like that. So if it's not exact, there are definitely ways that you can work around that. So I started and just made a little triangle form on top of the car coaster. And then I just did the same thing around this topper that I did for the base of the tumbler. We're just applying that blunt triangle pattern around the entire topper. And we're just kind of shaping it, smoothing it out as we go. And the great thing about Culture Sculpt is even after this is dried, you can sand it, reshape it, smooth it out, all sorts of things, because it is an epoxy. So some of my little lines, they weren't quite as triangular as I wanted them. So after everything cured, I just took my sanding block, I took my Dremel, and I just kind of shaped everything up and got it to the shape that I wanted. And when I got to the very top of my topper, I just made another little triangle shape and then just formed some little branches out to the side and just kind of set it on top. And you can kind of reshape things until you're happy with how it looks or until it starts to harden. I work fairly quickly with my Culture Sculpt. If you leave it sitting in a ball for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it will start to cure on you. So if you are new to working with this, I would suggest working in smaller batches. You do have more work time with Culture Sculpt than you do with air dry clay, in my opinion. But not as much as polymer clay, because obviously polymer clay will stay soft until you bake it in the oven. But with Culture Sculpt, you can spray paint it to get the color that you want, and with polymer clay, you cannot. So I am just going to set my topper on top of my lid, kind of see how things fit together. And after this dried, I did go back and add some extra branches, which you will see in the next clip. So you guys can see that I added some more little branches. This is after I sanded everything, so it is a little bit more smoother. And I am just going to start by coating the entire tumbler with UV resin. And I did this so everything was smoothed out. So when I spray painted it, you weren't going to see cracks or lines that maybe formed when the Culture Sculpt was drying, or little pieces that I couldn't get as smooth as I wanted to. But by adding a layer of UV resin, it smoothed everything out so we have a nice finish when we go to spray paint. So I just applied UV resin on the top and then set it in the sun for about 5 minutes so it was good and cure. And I prefer to use the sun just because I get the best cure. And once my topper is out in the sun curing, I'm going to do the same thing to the base of the tumbler. I'm just taking some UV resin and just getting it all in between the cracks, covering all of that Culture Sculpt. And Culture Sculpt is something that does not have to be sealed. It is an epoxy. I did loads of tests on it. It is not going to disintegrate in water. You can drill in it, all sorts of stuff. But since I want my cup as smooth as I can get it before I spray paint it, that is why I decided to seal it. And after I am done with this UV resin, I will clean my brush with a little cup of acetone and then wash it really well with Dawn dish soap, and my paintbrush is as good as new. So once I coat the bottom of this tree, I am going to set this on my outside table for about 5 minutes. Then I'm going to rotate it so the other side gets hit with the sun. And then once that is dry, I am going to spray paint the topper and the tumbler. So here's what my tree looks like when it is spray painted pink. I just used Candy Pink by Rust-Oleum. I just liked that pink. It was what we were going for. And then we're going to start adding some snow on our branches. I am just using the glitter snow. It is basically just a fake snow. If it is your first time using it, you do need to mix it up really well with just a popsicle stick or whatever you have on hand. And I am just going and adding some snow to the ends of all of my branches. I did start with just a little bit. I just did not want to add too much and regret putting so much on it. So I just started with kind of outlining the branches. You will see later in the video that I did go back and add more. I just felt like it needed a little bit more white on the cup. There's too much pink. But I'm just going to let this play so you guys can kind of see how I applied the glitter snow. I just applied it with a silicone tool. And the reason I applied it with the silicone tool is because if it dries on your brush or your tool or whatever you're using, if it's silicone, it'll pop right off. Because I forget to clean my brushes 90% of the time. So I am now adding just a little bit more to the body of the tree. And once I am done with this part, I'm going to set it to the side and we're going to start working on our topper. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing. We're just outlining all of the branches to start with, just to define the branches. And then we're working our way up the top of the topper. And as I'm doing this, I'm trying to kind of smooth it out a little bit because I don't want like chunks of the snow sticking up. So I'm just kind of smoothing it on, and then we're smoothing it around the top to look like snow has fallen on top of the tree and has just kind of cascaded down. And then what I decided to do was to sprinkle a little bit of glitter on the tree. I think I'm using Starburst Martini here, or it may be, I'm not really sure. It's a light pink. This may be the pink that was in week 1 of our Advent calendar, actually. So I sprinkled my glitter on, and I feel like this kind of took away from the white of the glitter snow after I added some more UV resin on. So next time I would probably add the glitter first, or it may have just been because I did not do a very heavy layer of the glitter snow. You guys can see here how it doesn't look as white anymore. So I may have just not done as thick of a coat as I wanted to, or I should have to begin with. But regardless, I am sealing everything again with UV resin. The glitter snow did dry for at least 24 hours. I wanted to make sure that it was completely dry. So we're working on our topper, then we're going to move on to the base of our tumbler. So you guys can see here, even the base of the tumbler, there doesn't appear to be very much white on it, even though y'all saw me load up the brushes. I think it just dried a little bit more transparent than I was planning on it drying. I had only used this for car freshies and a beach tumbler once before, so I wasn't too sure how white it was going to look once it dried. And some of you guys may be wondering why I opted to use UV resin instead of regular epoxy for these steps. And I chose to use UV resin because I could easily just paint this on for the layers, set it out in the sun, and it would be 100% cure in a matter of minutes, versus trying to smooth out the epoxy in between all of these cracks, make sure there are no globs as the tree is turning. I could just see after a few layers of doing regular epoxy that the buildup on the branches would probably be a little bit too much. So I thought that UV resin would be much easier. But if you feel more comfortable using regular epoxy, you can definitely do that as well. And at this point, I did decide to coat the trunk in UV resin as well. That way everything was kind of blended together. And after this tree and the topper part were cure, I lightly sanded it with my sanding block just to cut down on any of the pokey parts that the glitter snow may have caused. I don't mind the texture, but I don't want any like sharp pieces sticking out that would make it uncomfortable to hold. So that's why I kind of buffed it a little bit. And now we are ready to drill our hole for the topper. I had previously formed my tumbler around the lid so that the topper would fit the best onto the tumbler. And once I had it on my lid perfectly, I'm going to drill a hole with my drill bit. I typically start with a smaller drill bit and then work my way up to larger drill bits, just to help down on cracking and things like that. So now I am moving to a larger drill bit. This is the, I think it's a 1/8 or 1/4. And while I was doing this, my car coaster popped off, which I don't necessarily need on the bottom anyway. That was just kind of my base. So if yours pops off, it's not the end of the world. So now I'm using my largest drill bit. And I just use the largest one that I have, just so there's plenty of room for my straw to kind of move around. I don't want my straw just to be, you know, a snug fit in there. I want it to be able to move around. So we're just drilling. So now my straw fits perfectly in there. And if you guys get any little pieces that are kind of cracked or hanging on, you can just cut them off with your blade. Especially since I did do a layer of UV resin on top of this. Some of the resin was a little cracked, but we are going to go back over it and reseal everything again. So after we get our hole drilled, we are going to go in now and add our little Christmas lights. I am going to just set our topper on top of our lid. I still was deciding on if I was going to keep my car coaster or not. So I'm just putting my lid up there so I know where my lid is going to sit on my Christmas lights. And this was just a little strand of fake lights that I got at Hobby Lobby. They have a section in their store that is for mini Christmas trees, and that is where I found these. And we're just going to take our scissors and cut them off of the strand. These were really easy to cut. They were a very soft plastic. So we're just going to cut all of them off. And then I separated them by color so I would know how many of each color I had on hand. I wasn't sure if I was going to use every color because some of them, like, I didn't really care for the yellow color. But they all ended up going on the tree and looked good. And on some of the lights, there were little pokey pieces that were sticking up from where I cut them. So I did just take some sandpaper or nail file and just kind of filed down the lights that were really sharp, just because I wanted them to be able to sit flush against the branches. So I just kind of sanded them down a little bit. And once I got them all sanded, this is when I started kind of separating my colors just to see if I had equal amounts. And I also took some ColorFix paint and blush and just painted the inside of this hole just so it wasn't just such a contrast between the tree and the little straw hole. I am going to go back and seal this with epoxy. That way the paint is not going to wash off or anything like that. So I am just separating my little colors. And then I started to kind of plan where I was going to place them and how I was going to place them. And I was going to use super glue at first because I thought a gel super glue would hold them in place. But I did not like this as much as I thought that I would. It was more difficult to work with. So I used it for a couple of them. And I am really just kind of nestling the light bulbs in between the branches. But yes, the gel super glue was not really holding on these lights very well, so I did switch to liquid fusion, which is my go-to glue for pretty much everything. I was just worried about the lights kind of sliding down the cup, but it worked out well. So I just kind of applied a little glob of glue where I wanted my lights to be, and then I went back and applied the lights. And you guys can see I'm kind of butting up the back of the light bulb to a branch or a section that was kind of covered. That way it didn't look like the bulbs were just kind of randomly placed on the cup. And I did decide to go back and cover the ends of the light bulbs with the glitter snow anyway. So we are just going to do this all the way around our cup, and I am just kind of alternating colors. I'm trying to do one of every color so that we don't have all of our reds together, we don't have all of our purples together. So now that I am done with the topper part, I'm just going to take that off and set it to the side, and we're just going to go add our little glue dots to the rest of the cup, and we're going to start placing those bulbs. And I am kind of alternating the direction that the bulbs are facing. Some are facing to the left, some are facing to the right, so that way they don't all look too perfectly placed on the tumbler. And we're basically just going to do this all around our cup. I applied a few on each side and then just kind of looked to see if there were any spots that I felt like needed an extra one. And then I just selected a color that was not right next to it. And then I went back to my topper and added a few more lights to the topper as well. Even though it's just a topper, we don't want to forget about it. And once we get done applying all of our little Christmas lights, we are going to let this liquid fusion dry. It's typically dry in a few hours, but since we were going to be applying another layer of UV resin on top of this, I did let it sit for 24 hours just to make sure it was 100% dry. And I decided that I wanted to add some snow to the bottom of our cup just to make it look like the tree was sitting in snow. I did end up changing this a little bit, but I did start with a base of white ColorFix paint. This is also from Artistry. I love all of their ColorFix paints. If you guys do not have any of them, you should definitely try them. They are a paint primer and have a glitter glue built in to the bottles. So I am just covering the bottom with white so it looks like snowbanks. And then I wasn't too crazy about it. I wanted to add something else to it. So I did print some presents out on printable vinyl. And this is what I use for my cameo to cut out printable vinyl. Force 24, Blade 1, Speed 5, and it will get you that kiss cut. So they're basically like stickers and you can apply them to your tumblers or whatever you need them for. So after I applied my little stickers to the base of my tumbler, I just painted the whole thing white again. And I decided that I was going to use some glitter snow to give the bottom a little texture. I wasn't crazy about the flat white snowbanks. So I just painted the bottom white. And once that dried, I went back and added some glitter snow on top of that just to make it a little bit more 3D and went a little better with the tree. And when I added the glitter snow to the bottom of the tumbler, I also decided to go ahead and add glitter snow to the branches and to the light bulbs. So I just took my silicone tool again and I started adding just small globs of the glitter snow to the back of the Christmas lights. And this just helped disguise them a little bit and helped it feel like one cohesive piece versus just looking like the lights were just randomly stuck on the Christmas tree. It kind of looks like they're hidden under the branches, under the snow. And this is also when I decided to go ahead and just add more of the glitter snow to the rest of the tree and brighten that white back up again. And I definitely did a thicker layer this time. So if you guys have never used glitter snow before, I do suggest doing a thicker layer than you think that you'll need, because it does dry a little bit more transparent than it actually looks in the jar. Or at least that was my experience. So I was just kind of going to town at this point. Just piling on the snow, trying to get it a lot more opaque than the first round. And I also did not add glitter this time because I think the pink glitter had some iridescent and opal in it, which I think is what took away some of the pure white that I was looking for. So I am just covering those little lights, covering the branches, and then I did the same thing to the Christmas tree, but I'm not going to show you all that part because I know this tutorial is getting a little long. So I'm just going to show you guys how I added the glitter snow to the bottom of the tumbler. And I did this just to make it look a little bit more 3D and give it a little bit more texture instead of just flat white paint. So I am just kind of placing this and then just kind of reshaping it with my silicone tool. So I was really happy with how this was looking. So I'm going to add glitter snow all over the tumbler again. And once that dries, we're going to be ready to epoxy everything. So y'all can see I just really piled on that glitter snow this time on the branches. I wanted to make sure there is plenty of white on there. And this time I am going over the entire tumbler with regular fast set epoxy. This is not UV resin anymore. Our final 2 layers are going to be regular FDA compliant epoxy. And I am applying it the same way I did the UV resin, except this time it's on a turner. So I am just taking my paintbrush and basically painting in all of those little crevices, covering the entire surface with the epoxy. I am using Artistry's 1:1 ratio fast set. This is my favorite fast setting epoxy. I always get a great finish with very minimal bubbles. I do like to keep a dehumidifier running when I am using this epoxy. This epoxy does like low humidity, so if you live in an area where it rains a lot or is humid a lot, definitely get a humidifier or dehumidifier. I just grabbed one off of Amazon. I will link it in the description in case you guys are looking for one. And I'm just coating this right up to the top edge. And I'm being careful not to go over the edge. It's already sanded and smooth, so I want to try to keep it that way. So once I get all of this tumbler surface completely covered, I am just going through and kind of wiping out any globs that I see, especially around the little lights. I don't want globs of epoxy on there. I want to get it smooth. And then we're going to move over to our topper. And I am just going to apply a very thin layer of epoxy all over the entire topper. And I'm just going to let it sit. You guys can also see I am just adding a thin layer inside the straw hole as well, just to cover it, because remember we did go back and add a little paint so it would match the outside of the topper. And if you guys apply a thin enough coat of epoxy, it is not going to drip off the topper. We are just doing a thin coat just to make sure that everything is covered. And I will come back and check just to make sure there are no drips falling off of the branches, but my coat was pretty thin, so I did not have that problem. And once this was cured, I also flipped the topper upside down and did a thin coat on the underneath side of the branches, just so everything would be sealed in. If there was any spray paint on the inside, that was all sealed. So right now I'm just cleaning my brush. This is just a small cup of acetone. I am just sloshing it around and wiping it with my brush, and your brush is good and clean. So now that our tumbler is completely covered in epoxy, I did 2 layers. Now we're going to attach the topper with magnets. These are 10 by 5 millimeters. You can get different sizes. I do not remove the little silicone straw hole plug, I guess. I just leave it on there in case customers want it. I am going to use E6000 adhesive. I find that this works the best. It is kind of a tacky, rubbery adhesive that works well. Sometimes with epoxy or UV resin, it will pop off, even if I score or sand the lid. E6000, I have not had that problem with. So I just let it sit for a little bit and get kind of tacky. And then I am going to add my magnets. So I am going to take 2 magnets right now. They are stacked together, and put it on top of 1 glue drop. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. These are 2 magnets stacked together. So I'm just going to wait for this to dry a little bit. And then we're going to put some glue on the top of these magnets and add our topper. So we're just putting some more of the E6000. And I like to let it sit and get a little tacky, so it's not so liquidy. So now we're going to take our topper. I'm going to put my straw through the topper hole and into the straw hole and position it to where it looks good, how I want it to look when the magnets are actually attached. And we're going to let this sit and let everything dry. So now that the E6000 glue has dried, we're going to take our straw out. And then when we remove the topper, we're going to have 2 magnets that are attached to the lid itself and 2 magnets that are attached to the topper, so that you can attach it and detach it depending on if you want to walk around with a topper on your tumbler or not. So we are going to make a shaker bottom for this tumbler. I'm going to do the first layer with UV resin. You can use regular epoxy if you want to. I just did not have any facet epoxy upstairs, so I just opted to use UV resin this time. I am mixing a little bit of salted caramel white Russian into both cavities. So I'm going to fill up the exterior cavity first. And I just decided to use the same color for both cavities since we were going to add some sprinkles and snowflakes to the center. So for the center cavity, I am just doing a very, very thin layer. I don't want to fill it up too full because I still want there to be plenty of room for my little sprinkles and glitter to kind of move around in the shaker bottom. So we are filling this up. I'm just letting it kind of self-level a little bit. And then I am going to pop my bubbles with a torch. I'm just doing very quick little burst because I don't want this UV resin to heat cure. And then we're going to cure this. I usually leave it under for about 2 minutes. And once this layer has cured, we are going to add the sprinkles and glitter for our shaker bottom. So today I'm going to be using Candytopia sprinkles. These are available on thedrunkflamingo.com. This is a new item that I added with the release of my Advent box. And I'm just picking out the colors that I want to use. I'm just using pink, purple, green, and blue just to match the color of our tree. And then I'm going to add a few snowflakes. This is frostbite glitter. I do not have it in stock right now. It was part of November's flock box, but I will have some more on the way. So we are going to start with an acetate sheet or stencil paper, just some type of plastic that you can use for the bottom. I will link this in the description. And I am just tracing the bottom of my tumbler so I know how big I need to make the circle for my shaker bottom. And we're just going to cut that out. So once we get this circle cut out, I am going to kind of set it on top of my bottom just to make sure that it will cover correctly. So I'm just trimming it a little bit. So now I'm going to take my UV resin again, and I'm just going to apply this UV resin right on the exterior cavity. And we're going to set this acetate circle that we cut out right on top. And we're going to kind of press it down to make sure that the sides are touching the UV resin. We're going to cure that under our light. We're going to test it out, make sure everything looks good. And then I am going to add a layer of clear fast set epoxy on top of this. I use regular epoxy instead of UV resin just because I feel I get a harder cure with regular epoxy, and I want to make sure that that shaker bottom is going to be durable, hold up well in case customers may ding it on the bottom. It's not going to be soft or crack easily. And once we have that bottom finished, your tumbler will be complete. Here are some finished pictures. I really love how this tumbler turned out. I think it's super cute. It just totally reminds me of something you would find in Whoville. And I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If y'all decide to try this out, please post in my groups because I love to see what you guys come up with. These shaker bottoms are so fun to do. And thank you guys for tuning in and watching day 7 of our 12 days of Christmas. If you enjoyed this tutorial or learned something new, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to catch the next video coming up that was picked just for you. As always, if you're looking for more tips, tricks, or tutorials, be sure to check out my tutorial group or our Damn Fancy tribe. Both are linked in the description. Thanks for watching!